Subject of an article that's reviewed by Becky Oskin in Live Science. Grand Canyon carved by flood? Geologist says no. So I was interested in what kind of arguments there were for the idea that the Grand Canyon could not be carved by a flood. For those of you who want to look it up, the reference is there. And if you get the email from the Sabbath School, the reference will be in there as well. The article starts with a nice picture of the Grand Canyon that's taken from the National Park Service. Obviously a simplified version. This isn't a photo. And the article starts by asking the question, could the origins of the Grand Canyon lie in an enormous flood? The answer is no, says geologist Bill Dickinson, an emeritus professor of geology at the University of Arizona in Tucson. Tracing the history of the Grand Canyon is controversial. The deep gorge exposes 1 billion years of Earth history in its candy-colored cliffs, but geologists can't agree when it formed or exactly how. But I guess one thing for sure, it wasn't done by a giant flood. Dickinson hopes to lay to rest one hypothesis, that an ancient lake carved the canyon through a cascading series of waterfalls. A favored concept for 2 decades. This is the most popular theory right now. Interesting. I don't think it's a valid story, and my main purpose is to dismantle it, Dickinson said of his new study published in December 13 in the journal Geosphere. It's actually in the hard copy, which is what you'll look up. It's in February of 2013. Here's the gist of the idea. A giant lake covering eastern Arizona ate through a limestone ridge called the Kaibab Uplift, near the eastern end of the present-day Grand Canyon. A torrent of water spilled through that crack, cutting the canyon we see today. The Colorado River then followed the new course that was set. No lake, no flood. The lake in question, called Hopi Lake or Lake Bittahochi, stretched approximately 112 miles, or 180 kilometers, across Arizona and New Mexico, a length equivalent to Utah's Great Salt Lake. The sediments left behind sit atop a great unconformity, a missing period of geologic time, with the 8-million-year-old lake sitting silt, blanketing 225-million-year-old pink mudstone that forms the Painted Desert. Called the Bittahochi Formation, the rocks are evidence of a shallow ephemeral playa lake, not a deep basin large enough to buzzsaw its way through the Grand Canyon, Dickinson argues. There's no evidence from sedimentology that it was ever a deep lake. It was hardly a deep playa, Dickinson told Our Amazing Planet, who is partners with Life Science. Other researchers who have carefully reanalyzed the sediments have also found that the lake was not there as long as previously thought, said Richard Young, a geology professor at the State University of New York in Geneseo. There's no way the lake could have been there for 20 million or 10 million years, he told Our Amazing Planet. Plus, there's the problem of the Kaibab Uplift, a pinch in the Colorado Plateau where the rocks swell up due to underground folding. Sitting near the head of the Grand Canyon, the Kaibab Uplift is a 650-foot or 250-meter barrier that any prehistoric lake or river must have carved through before dropping down into the future gorge. The preserved lake beds show water levels were never high enough to cross the uplift, Dickinson said. Once the Colorado River. Knocking down Hopi Lake leaves a major puzzle. What was the course of the Colorado River before the Grand Canyon deepened? Some geologists think the early Colorado River flowed south into the lake. Dickinson suggested the ancestral Colorado River crossed northern Arizona, flowing northwest across the plateau. It exited the state through the Virgin River drainage, where Utah, Arizona, and Nevada meet. It joined the Virgin River, or it may have been the main water through the Virgin River. Well, I would think that if it got there, it would be the main water, because the Virgin River I don't think is as big as the Colorado. Part of the challenge of solving the Grand Canyon's history is that so much has changed in the ensuing millions of years. Climate was different then, the topography has changed dramatically, and tectonic forces continue to reshape the plateau. There is undoubtedly a true history of how Grand Canyon evolved into what we see today, said Carl Karlstrom, a geology professor at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, who was not involved in Dickinson's new study. The present Grand Canyon is made up of sections each with somewhat different ages and histories. Prior to 6 million years ago, there were paleo rivers and paleo canyons whose flow, direction, and geometry is rapidly getting figured out by the geologic community. For example, Dickinson points out that the deep canyons and tall mountains that feed today's powerful Colorado River didn't exist 10 million years ago. One of the hardest things to hindcast, as opposed to forecast, I guess, is to know how big a river you're looking for in Grand Canyon country, he said. What was the river like up in Utah? I hope that if people would just abandon the Hopi Lake spillover game, their thoughts would lead them on to worrying about Utah. Does that mean maybe there was a lake in Utah that spilled over? Doesn't really say. And before we go to the actual article, I thought it would be appropriate to review theories on the Grand Canyon, and I get most of my material from Dr. Ariel Roth, and there is the reference involved. The first model of the Grand Canyon might be called the antecedent model, and that basically means that the river was there and the plateau rose around it while the river just kept carving into the plateau. I think that's a fair assessment. It was first proposed by John Wesley Powell, who was one of the first people to go through the gorge that we know of. And that is that the river was always there. The plateau rose, and the river cut down, and there was plenty of time, 50 million years, whatever. The problem is that the Kaibab upwarp preceded the river. That is, the river appears to follow it on the east side. And for that comment, I'm indebted to a map from sciencesandscripture.com. That's Dr. Roth's website. And you can see the Kaibab uplift is going here, and the Colorado River comes to it and then follows it for a while and then curves off. And that implies that the uplift was there before the Colorado River got there. So the Powell model is not really believed by too many other people. Well, then there's a superimposed model, which is kind of like the other model in that here, again, the river cuts down while the plateau rises. But what happens is that the area at either end of the plateau is filled in with other material. Where that other material went is not clear. But the idea is that the Colorado River itself actually didn't have to cut through, and in fact could be influenced by the Kaibab upwarp, presumably because it started at a higher level. There are problems with this model too. One of them is you have to elevate the source of the Colorado River, and how do you do that? And there's lack of evidence for the ancient river, although to be fair to this point of view, if you erased all of the extra material on either end, or even on one end, you would wind up with erasing most of the evidence for an ancient river. And there's the Muddy Creek problem in the Pliocene. And the Muddy Creek problem has to do with deposits in the west end of the canyon, where it comes out. And there is a formation that appears to be on both sides of the river, which means that it's difficult to visualize how you can lay the same material down on both sides of the river while the river is running through it. So it appears that this was laid down before there was a river coming through. And that stuff is usually dated to about 6 million years, which means that the canyon is no more than 6 million years old, at least the mouth of the canyon. And how do you dig a canyon without having a mouth? Now, we're going to see the Biddehochi Formation a little bit later, and you're going to see more maps of it, and that gives you an idea of the approximate area that we're talking about. Then there's something that could be called antiposition, which was proposed by Hunt in 1956, and that was that there was an ancient river in the Miocene that carved the canyon, apparently, and then there was uplift and ponding of the river and apparently filling in, and then the river, and that allows you to get, I guess, the front end taken care of the muddy river to kind of go across the mouth, and then the river finally re-erodes the old pathway. Well, actually, the muddy creek it doesn't work that well with that solution, and so the proposal has been made that the river kind of, I guess, went underground, went into the ground, and kind of slowly seeped through sandstone, or perhaps went through karst limestone caves. Of course, where the cave is now is not clear. Again, it's a solution that isn't too popular at this time. Although I will have to say it, in my opinion, it beats some of the other ones. There was a conference in 1964 that tried to explain what was going on by stream capture. That is, originally the Colorado River flowed south along the Little Colorado River, probably out to the Rio Grande. And then a stream eroded its way all the way back across the plateau, finally got close to the Colorado River, and when the Colorado River found an easier way to the sea, it dumped the Little Colorado River and came back south. And then, of course, the Little Colorado River, in the meantime, I guess something uplifted one end of it, and it started running back into the Colorado River. I guess that's a long stream capture. The major problem is, how does such a small stream dig such a large channel? More importantly, how does such a small stream dig such a deep channel? Because it has to be deeper than the Colorado River itself, otherwise you couldn't capture it. And how do you get that final last little leg? Maybe there was another karst cave that allowed the water to come through and it collapsed after it eroded enough. And doesn't that kind of a small stream also cut the muddy creek in two? And it can't do that until the muddy creek has already been formed. So then there's the what could be called the Northwest Passage, which is proposed by Lichida. This time the Colorado River, instead of going down the Little Colorado River, went up the northwest, probably at Kanab Creek, and apparently, from what I can gather, to the Virgin River, where it went back down and around. The problem there is that there's no evidence that there was a river in that area. So I guess it would have had to have flowed over the top of the plateau in a kind of a broad, I guess, Platte River kind of thing, an inch deep and a mile wide. And then maybe that's when the Virgin River Gorge was cut, was when the Colorado River was flowing through it. I'm trying to be as sympathetic as I can. That theory you will hear resurrected in this paper. Then there's the lake spillover, which came from a conference in 2000, Canyonlands Lake and Biddehochi Lake. And I'll see if we can find a slide to show you that. And the problems with Bidahochi Lake itself are going to be outlined by our paper, so I'm not going to spend much time on that. This theory is I guess, the most modern one, and it is the target of the article by Dickinson. And then there's a Canadian theory, which I haven't figured out what problems it's trying to solve. It proposed that the Colorado drained from Lake Mead to Canada and the Arctic, and I'm not sure how you get there, or what, because you still have the Muddy Creek. You haven't solved that at all. And then there's the middle first theory, which argues that there's actually somebody who proposed it. It argued that the central part of the canyon was carved first, and then the ends were left to the end. And we're going to see some of the evidence behind all this stuff. Then there are some creationist theories. One of them was a breached anticline, which is proposed by Austin in 1994, which is basically similar to the lake spillover, except that it happened a lot faster. It was ponded lakes left over from the flood, and specifically, not only the Lake Bidahochi or Hopi Lake, if you prefer, but also the northern lakes as well. And then there's the idea that the whole thing was done by floodwaters. And it's possible that you could make a hybrid between those two, where the outer canyon was dug by floodwaters and the inner canyon was finished off by lake spillover. The floodwaters is proposed at least by Ord in 2011, and I'm sure there are other people who have proposed it before him and since. And the nice thing about the floodwaters is that it also offers an explanation for the Great Denudation, which otherwise you can't really explain very well. Anyway, to get back to our article, how the Grand Canyon was not made, I'm not quite exaggerating. This is called Rejection of the Lake Spillover Model for Initial Incision of the Grand Canyon and Discussion of Alternatives. And it's in Geosphere 9:1-20. Again, it was online in December 2012, but the paper version came out in 2013. And the abstract is available online. And if you are a member of the Loma Linda University Library, you'll be pleased to know that Geosphere can be obtained from the library, and so therefore you can actually get the entire article in whatever form you prefer, either the HTML or the PDF. One hypothesis, we're starting the article, I'm just going to read the abstract because that gives you kind of an orientation. One hypothesis for the origin of the Grand Canyon is that a broad Hopi Lake, of which lake beds of the Miocene Bidahochi Formation are a vestigial record, ponded to a great depth, enough near the Miocene-Pliocene time boundary to spill over the topographic barrier of the Kaibag-Coconino Plateau to initiate incision of the Grand Canyon below the lake outlet. Bidahochi paleogeography indicates that Hopi Lake was a playa system that never achieved appreciable depth. So it's going to be his first argument. It's not a big enough lake. One hypothesis for the origin of the Grand Canyon is that a broad... I'm sorry. I was supposed to have... Topographic relations in northern Arizona show that the maximum elevation of Bidahochi lake beds is not compatible with lake spillover through the Grand Canyon unless post-Bidahochi deformation or pre-Bidahochi canyon cutting altered the landscape in ways unsupported by geologic evidence, or the surface of Hopi Lake rose transiently to elevations unrecorded by any sediment. So it needs to be bigger, and there's no evidence that it was bigger. The implications of erosional episodes affecting the Colorado Plateau, the timing of drainage reversals across the central Colorado Plateau, the spatial pattern of the Colorado River drainage system, and the analogous configurations of multiple river canyons cut into Precambrian basement within the river basin also challenge the Hopi spillover model. A viable alternative scenario for incision of the Grand Canyon is the concept of an ancestral Miocene Colorado River that transited the Kaibab uplift on the side of the eastern Grand Canyon, but exited the Colorado Plateau into an ancestral Virgin River drainage before capture near the site of the present central Grand Canyon by a stream working headward through the western Grand Canyon from the Grand Wash Cliffs. Introduction. Forget the university. I should have. That should be out of there. The reason the Grand Canyon was cut by the Colorado River is disputed, and there is a mass of references. This paper evaluates the lake spillover model, which holds that the Miocene Bitahoche Formation of northeastern Arizona contains lake beds that are a vestigial record of a once deep Hopi lake, filled with waters from the Colorado River in Utah that ponded east of the Kaibab Coconino Plateau until it spilled over the crest of the Plateau Dam, and lake spillover near the Miocene-Pliocene time boundary initiated incision of the Grand Canyon below the lake outlet. Bitahoche paleogeography does not support the lake spillover model without ancillary paleotopographic hypotheses that are difficult to sustain. And he's quoting himself. Consideration of the upstream morphology of the Colorado drainage system suggests constraints for alternate hypotheses. Background. Blackwelder rejected pre-Laramide antecedents for the course of the Colorado River through the Laramide uplifts like the Kaibab uplift transected by the Grand Canyon. He suggested instead that the haphazard course of the river through multiple Laramide uplifts originated from successive spillover waters from lake basins on a semi-arid Colorado plateau of low relief before incision of the Grand Canyon promoted dissection of the plateau's surface upstream by headward erosion. Colorado River on top of the plateau, and then finally it started carving from the back, from the mouth of the canyon forward, which makes a certain amount of sense. Scarborough concluded that lake beds within the Miocene Bitahoche Formation were deposited within Hopi Lake, which in his view covered 30 times 10 to the third square kilometers. That's 30,000 square kilometers, which is, what, 300 by 100 kilometers or so? In northeastern Arizona, east of the Kaibab Coconino Plateau, transected by the modern Grand Canyon. Scarborough initially envisioned that Hopi Lake was drained when headward erosion upstream through the Grand Canyon breached the Kaibab Coconino barrier that dammed the lake basin on the west, but later suggested that the lake level might have overtopped the Kaibab Coconino barrier near a locale where previous Laramide erosion had cut a drainage notch through the confining uplands. So there was a Kaibab, and it had a cut in the middle of it already, and so you didn't have to go over the top of the Kaibab plateau itself. All you had to do was reach the level of that notch, which is actually not a bad idea. Meek and Douglas took the postulate of lake spillover a logical step further by inferring that incision of the Grand Canyon was triggered when Hopi Lake spilled across the elevated Kaibab Coconino tract without benefit of a pre-existing paleocanyon as a guide for water flow. Studies of sedimentation along the course of the lower Colorado River downstream from the Grand Canyon have documented that the Colorado River did not flow through the Grand Canyon until near the Miocene-Pliocene time boundary. That's Muddy Creek, among other things. This inception of water flow through the canyon initially formed a chain of downstream lakes within which the lacustrine Boos Formation was deposited along the modern river course. And there's the Grand Canyon, and there's the little Colorado River in this, the Colorado River itself turning north and connecting with the Green River, which is, as everybody knows, the center of the universe. And here's the mouth of the Grand Canyon, and these deposits here in red are the include the Muddy Creek Formation that had to be 6 million years ago or less by standard geological dating. The best current estimate for the entry of the Colorado River water into the desert basins below the Grand Canyon is about 4.9 million years, early Pliocene, based on the geochemical correlation of distal asphalt tuff within the Boos Formation with the 4.83 million year old Lawler tuff erupted near San Francisco Bay, California. So they're finding tuff from San Francisco Bay in the Boos Formation, which is this area down here. That tephrochronology is compatible both with the age, 5.6 million years, of a sub-Boos tuff, and with the age, 6 million years, of the youngest dated tuff interbedded with lacustrine Hualapai limestone, which was deposited before the arrival of Colorado River water to interconnected desert basins north of the Boos Lake chain, but still downstream from the mouth of the Grand Canyon. So that's the canyon can't even get started to be cut until 6 million years. Well, it looks like some of this stuff is closer to 4.8 million years. The Boos Formation records rapid inundation of desert basins along the Boos Lake chain. They got flooded. The abrupt arrival of Colorado River water downstream from the Grand Canyon has been taken to support the model of Hopi Lake spillover to initiate incision of the Grand Canyon. Evidence for episodic integration of the lower Colorado River by progressive spill down from successive Boos Lake basins is unable, however, to define the mode of drainage evolution upstream from the Grand Canyon that integrated upper and lower courses of the Colorado River into a unified trunk stream passing through the Grand Canyon. The likelihood of spillover from Hopi Lake to initiate river flow through the Grand Canyon can be addressed by examining the sedimentary record of the Bidhochi Formation, Hopi Lake itself, which contains the only known lacustrine deposits thought to record Hopi Lake sedimentation. For those of you who are not geologists, lacustrine, it means lake deposits. Bidhochi paleogeography. The evolution of the Bidhochi depositional system from lacustrine to fluvial, that's lake to river, environments, predated Colorado River flow through the Grand Canyon, but coincided approximately with deposition of the youngest tuff, 6 million years within the Hualapai limestone. In other words, the claim that's being made is that you have the Bidhochi depositional system, and it actually quits before you get the flood on the other side, or the canyon cut on the other side. So it can't have cut the canyon because it was gone before the canyon started. Basalt lava that locally mantles outcrops of the Bidhochi Formation has yielded an argon-argon age of 2.4 million years, precluding continuation of Bidhochi sedimentation into Pleistocene times. So the Bidhochi just doesn't last past, well, according to this, it doesn't last past 2.4 million years, so maybe there was the possibility of a flood that came through. Bidhochi paleoenvironments, volcanological analysis of the middle volcanic member forming the Hopi Buttes indicates that Hopi Lake was never a deep body of water during the late Miocene time frame, 8.5 to 6.50 million years, when its level must ultimately have risen to where it eventually to achieve lake spillover to initiate incision of the Grand Canyon. So the lake is too shallow and doesn't last long enough. Fence Lake and Quemado formations. The alluvial Fence Lake and Quemado formations of westernmost New Mexico, east of St. John's, have been regarded provisionally as lateral extensions of Bitahoche strata, but are excluded here from the Bitahoche depositional system for the following reasons. So maybe Bitahoche Lake was bigger than he's claiming, but this can't be right because, and I'm just going to summarize because the two long paragraphs that are difficult to follow. The original drainage of the New Mexico area is into the Rio Grande, according to Dickinson. So even though it looks like the same lake, it can't be because it would have drained into the Rio Grande and out to the Atlantic instead of the Pacific. And the Quemado Formation is younger than the Bitahoche. So they've got the ages pegged, and the Quemado Formation just simply couldn't be part of the Bitahoche. It's the wrong date. Strontium isotopes and detrital zircons. He talks about initial strontium 87 to strontium 86 ratios. I'm sorry, that didn't come out very well. Oh, just needed to click it again. Speculative coupling of Colorado River flow with Bitahoche sedimentation is apparently denied by the ages of Bitahoche detrital zircons. That is to say, sand has various components, and one of the components is zircon. And you can measure those zircons and see, what radiometric dates they have, where they probably came from. And Bitahoche's detrital zircon populations closely resemble those in sands from the modern Little Colorado River, but differ substantially from detrital zircon populations in modern sands from the Colorado River and its major upstream tributaries, including the Green, Grand, Upper Colorado, and San Juan rivers. The Bitahoche depositional system evidently received no sediment from a postulated ancestral Colorado River flowing southeast from Utah into Hopi Lake. That's a fair point. Obviously, the Colorado River gets detrital zircons from the Little Colorado River because Little Colorado River now runs into the Colorado River, and eventually they all get mixed up. But I guess what he's saying is that the Colorado River couldn't have gone through, otherwise it would have left Colorado River zircons in Hopi Lake, eventually to be found in the Bitahoche Formation. Hopi Lake spillover, again, ignore the university. The level of Hopi Lake could not have risen higher than 2,000 meters without leaving a record of lacustrine transgression, which is not observed within the fluvial facies tract of the Bitahoche Formation. It didn't get that high according to what we can see. Contours on the present landscape show that a lake surface about 2,000 meters could not have overtopped the Kaibab Coconino Plateau in its present configuration. Moreover, the Grand Canyon transects the highest rather than the lowest segment of the residual plateau uplands that extend northwest across the Colorado River from the Mogollon Rim in central Arizona, which we'll see where that is in just a bit. The lowest modern topographic saddle in pre-Pliocene strata forming the uplands lies due west of Bitahoche exposures beneath the post-6 million years old San Francisco volcanic fields, which therefore couldn't have blocked the Lake Bitahoche. And here's there's the Mogollon Rib. Here's the Little Colorado River coming through. And if you look over here, you can see the Colorado River and the Colorado River going up to Lee's Ferry and Page and the Glen Canyon Dam eventually. And you can see stuff that's over 2,000 meters high surrounding this area. So you could have had a fairly large pond if you could figure out how to do it. The problem is, here's the Colorado River, the Grand Canyon cutting through, and you can see that on either side there's actually 2,500 meters here and 2,100 meters up here. So you have to go extra 100 to 500 meters to get through. It's almost as if the river took the highest point and charged right through it, which, doesn't make sense for a river most of the time. These relations jointly imply that a spillover of Biddehochi-related Hopi Lake to initiate incision of the Grand Canyon is not a realistic hypothesis unless, 1, post-Biddehochi tectonic or isostatic deformation and associated erosion has substantially altered the morphology of northern Arizona to erect a Kaibab-Coconino topographic barrier that did not exist in its present form at Biddehochi Lake. In other words, the barrier rose afterwards, which is a possibility, I guess. 2, integration of the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon was facilitated by the presence of an older paleo canyon that provided a pathway for water flow from lake spillover through an erosional notch incised into the Kaibab-Coconino Plateau at an elevation lower than its crest, which is another possibility, that the Kaibab Plateau was already split by the time the Colorado River tried to get through. Or 3, the water surface of Hopi Lake rose at least transiently to elevations at which no sedimentary record of lacustrine conditions has survived post-Grand Canyon erosions. None of these postulates is attractive, at least to Dickinson. Post-Biddehochi deformation. Consideration of differential modern and Pliocene incision rates within the Grand Canyon, coupled with geodynamic modeling from mantle tomography, suggests that the southwestern rim of the Colorado Plateau has been uplifted by as much as 400 meters over the past 6 million years. If the modern elevation of the top of the Kaibab-Coconino Plateau is restored downward by 400 meters, the 6 million year elevation of the plateau barrier damming postulated Hopi Lake would stand near the maximum elevation of the Biddehochi lacustrine facies. Ooh, it could actually work if you lowered the Kaibab. Spillover of even a shallow lake or an array of ponded wetlands across such a subdued Kaibab-Coconino barrier would be feasible. We can do that this way. The postulated tectonic welt continues, however, along the Mogollon Rim to the southeast of the Grand Canyon, where present maximum elevations are approximately the same, 2,200 to 2,300 meters, as on the Kaibab-Coconino Plateau, where transected by the Grand Canyon. Restoring the Mogollon Rib downward, in other words, if you raise everything at the same time, and so if you go backwards, you're putting down the Mogollon Rim, to the same elevation in Lake Miocene times as the lacustrine facies of the Biddehochi Formation would conflict, however, with paleogeographic analysis, implying a persistent regional slope to the northeast from the Mogollon Rim towards an ancestral Little Colorado River since Middle Miocene times. It looks like there's always been a slope as things got deposited. I guess that's looking for paleocurrents in the Cenozoic. Downward restoration of the Mogollon Rim for Miocene times would allow potential pre-Grand Canyon drainage of the Biddehochi Depot Center toward the southwest across the present Mogollon Rim and into the ancestral Salt River. Figure 1, therefore precluding a Biddehochi outlet through the Grand Canyon. In other words, it should have gone across the Mogollon Rim instead of around through the Grand Canyon. Suggested paleocanyons and then other thermochronological analyses and geotectonics arguments do not support the existence of a pre-Neogene Grand Canyon, which 4 key geological relationships argue against. Now, I'm not sure that I can connect this with all of the stuff that he's arguing. He may be able to connect it better than I can. But what I want to point out is what he's actually arguing against is that the Grand Canyon went all the way through before the Neogene, before 6 million years ago, if you like. 1. Headwater tributaries of the Verde River, working headward into the Colorado Plateau along the northern fringe of the Gila River drainage, reach to within about 5 kilometers of the rim of the western Grand Canyon and to within about 10 kilometers of the Colorado River itself in the bottom of the canyon. It seems unlikely that a deep canyon could persist as such a narrow feature for 55 to 75 million years after its initial incision. Yet otherwise, Verde headwaters could not approach the Grand Canyon so closely if the latter originated in the Cretaceous or Paleogene time. If this was dug way, way back when, you would have expected the Verde River not to be draining right next to the Grand Canyon. In fact, in some places in the Grand Canyon, you can go 15 feet away from the canyon edge, and the drainage is now going south instead of north into the canyon. This is a little bizarre. A butte, informally named Separation Canyon Hill, perched on the rim of the western Grand Canyon northwest of Peach Springs, is composed of Oligocene buck and doe conglomerate, overlain by a cap of 19-million-year-old basalt. So here's this butte. It has, on the top of it, 19-million-year-old basalt, and then underneath it, buck and doe conglomerate. Buck and doe conglomerate is not that old either, according to the standard theories. And what that means is that you have buck and doe formation that laid on top of a flat place, and then lava that flowed on top of that, and then the butte was carved out and left intact. The butte is now completely surrounded by gorges of the Grand Canyon and its local tributary canyons over the positions of which the strata composing the butte would have projected laterally before canyon incision. So you have to lay this stuff down and then carve it out, and the stuff is 19 million years old by standard chronology. And so if that happened, then the canyon can't have been carved greater than 19 million years ago. Otherwise, you couldn't get that formation on top of the butte. Sort of the version of if you find a turtle on top of a fence post, he didn't get there by himself. The butte is now completely surrounded by gorges of the Grand Canyon and its local tributary canyons over the positions of which the strata composing the butte would have projected laterally before the canyon incision. The relations at Separation Canyon Hill constrained the Grand Canyon to an origin after 19 million years ago. Of course, we already had that 6 million years for the Muddy Creek Formation, so probably a lot less than 19 million years from the standard perspective. I'm going to skip over 3 and 4, which are complicated, difficult to explain, have to do with things like zircons and where they came from and stuff. The suggestion that a laramide paleocanyon developed along segments of the Grand Canyon west of the Kaibab-Coconino Plateau and flowed northward into Utah without crossing the Kaibab uplift does not bear on the question of the Hopi Lake spillover. Transient lake level. Speculation that Hopi Lake rose transiently to a level allowing the Colorado River water to spill over the Kaibab-Coconino uplift without leaving any discernible sedimentary record of the lake, high stand, is inherently impossible to address without any direct geologic evidence. The same problem plagues evaluation of suggested Miocene paleolakes located farther north in Utah at stratigraphic levels since removed by erosion. So there's other paleolakes there as well. In the absence of locally preserved geological evidence, well, what do? Can you make the argument that absence of evidence is evidence of absence? And that's the problem that you run into with this. Mogollon Highlands. The southwest margin of the Colorado Plateau, including the site of the modern Grand Canyon, was stripped of much of its pre-Cretaceous Mesozoic cover by Upper Jurassic to early Cretaceous erosion along the tilted northern flank of the Mogollon Highlands. I think that's a fancy way of saying there was a great denudation. That all of the sediments, some of them got laid down and then they just got cleaned off over a large section of the area. Laramide uplifts. The East Kaibab monocline, the deformation of that was underway by 80 to 78 million years ago, and the stratigraphic relationships across the East Kaibab monocline north of the Grand Canyon imply that Laramide deformation giving rise to the Kaibab uplift. This is when the plateau started to go up. Began in late Cretaceous time, reached some maximum rate in Paleocene time, and waned during Eocene times. So we're talking roughly 50, 45 million years ago, and it's all done. Started 80 and finished about 45, more or less. So that gives you an idea of the standard chronology and how it views the front, the higher end of the Grand Canyon. I'm going to skip over a whole bunch of stuff that is there probably because he needs to be complete. It doesn't, at least as far as I can tell, bear directly on what we're looking at. And then we're going to get to Laramide uplift transits. The Grand Canyon is not the only place where the Colorado River has eroded into a Laramide uplift to the depth of the Precambrian basement. Further north, the upper Colorado, Grand, and Green Rivers incise the Uncompahgre and Uinta uplifts, respectively, to exposed Precambrian rocks in Westwater and Lador canyons. So this is pretty common for the Colorado River to carve all the way down to not just bedrock, but to the underlying Precambrian stuff. And then it has the Kaibab uplift, and it talks about Crooked Ridge. This is now on his favorite theory. The location of the Crooked Ridge Paleochannel. There's apparently what looks like an old river at Crooked Ridge in Figure 6, which I don't, we may see that. And the configurations of the fluvial Bitahoche Paleochannels ancestral to the tributaries of the Little Colorado River suggest that both systems flowed into an ancestral Miocene Colorado River not far east of the Kaibab uplift near the present confluence of the Colorado and Little Colorado Rivers. And that's a whole bunch of stuff that the point that he's trying to make is calculations suggest that the Miocene Colorado River had already breached the Kaibab limestone on the Kaibab uplift and was transecting the Kaibab Coconino Plateau in an ancestral valley with its floor at about 1,600 meters near the top of the Red Wall limestone. So what that's saying is, remember the front end of the canyon, the mouth of the canyon, can't have gotten started more than about 6 million years ago. The back end of the canyon, in fact, has been carved already by the time you get to the Miocene. So we're carving the back end before the front end is ready to go. You figure that one out. Residual mystery. So he hasn't got it all together, and he knows it. Multiple arguments thus jointly disfavor Hopi Lake spillover as the trigger for incision of the Grand Canyon through the Kaibab Coconino Plateau, implying instead that an ancestral Colorado River with a large upstream drainage basin but an unknown volume of discharge crossed the Kaibab uplift before the modern canyon was cut. It remains a mystery where such a river exited the plateau west of the Kaibab uplift. It flowed into the uplift. It didn't come out. The Kaibab uplift is a roach motel. Rivers go in, but they don't go out. There is conclusive evidence that no such river passed through or at some pre-canyon erosional level above the present mouth of the Grand Canyon. So where did it go? Canyon capture. If an ancestral Colorado River crossed the Kaibab uplift but did not follow the route of the Western Grand Canyon, the most logical pathway for paleoflow lies to the west-northwest across the area of the northern Uinkaret and Shivwitz plateaus north of the Grand Canyon, as postulated by Luchita and presumed by Pelletier. Probably Pelletier, but from model calculations, Pelletier concluded that a proto-western Grand Canyon working headward from the foot of the Grand Wash Cliffs, which formed by normal faulting between 6 million and 9 million years ago. This thing started 6 to 9 million years ago, or 16 to 9 million years ago, which means that the Muddy Creek is still in the way, right? The Muddy Creek needs to form at 6 million years ago, and this thing is already cutting its way back. Let's see. Could, by the end of the Miocene time, have captured the pre-Grand Canyon Colorado River somewhere west of the Kaibab uplift, but east of the Shivwitz Plateau at a point about 150 kilometers from the Grand Wash Cliffs. Estimated rate of headward erosions are not sufficient to allow a nick point to migrate upstream from the Grand Wash Cliffs far enough to propagate through the Kaibab uplift within the time frame available for the canyon evolution. Now, let me orient you a little bit. This is figure 1 and an enlargement of this particular area. And I have added that this is about the position of St. George, just across the Utah-Arizona border on the Virgin River. And what he's proposing is that the Grand Canyon here stopped about there and then went across country instead of continuing to carve down here. Then this little stream here starts about here and carves backwards until finally it gets to the Colorado River, and then everything joins again. Now, and just for what it's worth, I think this is 6. And that hill should be there somewhere, but I didn't look at it precisely. Here is the Shivwitz Plateau, and here's the Uinkaret Plateau. So it's flowing somewhere in this area, somewhere upwards. So let's go back and so it's somewhere in this area right here. Now, did it start over here? Did it start over here? Did it start somewhere in the middle there? But in any case, it went across and then flowed into the Virgin River. So that's where the old Colorado River is supposed to flow to. Downstream paradox. The evolution of the Grand Canyon outlined above involves a paradox because no exit from the plateau for ancestral Shivwitz crossing Colorado River has yet been surely identified. That's a fancy way of saying we can't find any evidence of it. Any such stream would have continued northwest towards St. George in the drainage of the modern Virgin River. And, maybe not exactly at St. George, maybe a little to one side, but they can't find the river. But he's still proposing this. Precursors of the modern White River and Meadow Valley Wash contributed sediments to the Muddy Creek Formation, as did the Paleo-Virgin River itself, but there is doubt that any Colorado River sediment is present in the Muddy Creek Formation. Comparable detrital zircon ages from the Muddy Creek Formation in the Colorado River are thus provisionally consistent with the hypothesis that the Muddy Creek Depocenter was the Miocene terminus of an ancestral pre-Grand Canyon Colorado River, where riverine sand mixed in varying proportions with more locally derived sands delivered by the ancestral Virgin River, and drainage is still farther west. If so, the central conundrum of how the Colorado River was integrated through the Grand Canyon is resolved by the Pelletier postulate that of stream capture at a stratigraphic horizon above the modern central Grand Canyon, following headward erosion of the Grand Wash Cliffs through the western Grand Canyon, with subsequent deep incision of the eastern Grand Canyon through the Kaibab-Coconino Plateau. Hopi Lake spillover can then be viewed as not only an unlikely but also an unnecessary hypothesis. In other words, wait a minute. I thought we had a problem with this, but we've got it actually solved. So you can forget about that flow over hypothesis. Further study of Muddy Creek sedimentation is indicated. I would say so. Conclusions: the paleography of the Bitahoche Formation and the elevation of the Bitahoche exposures relative to the crest of the Kaibab-Coconino Plateau disfavors spillover Hopi Lake to initiate inclusion of the Grand Canyon by integrating upper and lower segments of the Colorado River without ancillary paleotopographic assumptions that are difficult to defend. So he's saying you can't buy the Hopi Lake thing. It won't work. Stream capture at a point near the central Grand Canyon could have diverted the river water into Boos Lakes downstream from the Grand Canyon as abruptly as lake spillover could have. So the Boos Lakes were flooded. Everybody knows that. But the way they were flooded is by suddenly diverting the Colorado, which was already flowing into the Virgin River and therefore back into the Colorado where it is now once the Virgin River rejoins it. And that somehow flooded those lakes. The point of exit of the pre-capture Colorado River from the Colorado Plateau remains uncertain. Yes, but a Paleo-Virgin River and the Muddy Creek depositional basis are seemingly viable candidates for the exit point. Now, I agree with Dickinson that Hopi Lake was not big enough to cut the canyon all by itself. It's just not big enough. However, the emptying lake may have cut the canyon of the Little Colorado River, which is close to a slot canyon, and may have deepened the inner gorge of the Grand Canyon. And what I mean by slot canyon, walls that are near vertical. And here's a photo from the air. Just for fun, here's what it looks like in Google Earth. This is north. Here's the Colorado River running here. And there's the Little Colorado River, and you can see it's really deeply incised. And if you get down a little closer, you can get a little better idea of how deeply incised, but the vertical height kind of can be exaggerated. So I'm going to fly you down to look up inside, which is difficult to do if you're doing this in person, unless you have a helicopter or something. But that gives you an idea. I mean, this is really incised down straight. I wish I had some photos of looking over the rim because I do have some, but I've lost a few of them. The Little Colorado River really is near vertical walls. Well, for that matter, depending on where you are in the Grand Canyon, there's some pretty near vertical walls going right down to the Colorado. This is in this one is Marble Canyon. This is the inner gorge, and you see the inner gorge is pretty close to Slot Canyon itself. And here's another shot, and you can see here the inner gorge, and then the outer the outer area, which is carved back at a considerably less of an angle. My take, I think there are several problems with the stream capture theory. And one of them is, how did a small stream do more work than the Colorado itself? Because presumably the small stream didn't have the flow from the Colorado. Second, why is there not a remnant canyon going north from the Grand Canyon? If the Grand Canyon can be carved by the Colorado, why wouldn't it carve another canyon going north if it went north once upon a time? I suppose one could say that it flowed across the plateau and then it went into the Virgin River and it cut the Virgin River Gorge. That's the only way I can make sense of that. Does not the small stream cut the Muddy Creek Formation just as effectively as the Colorado would? Especially if it's carving out the western Colorado, western Grand Canyon. And finally, would not the Colorado River contribute detritus to the Virgin River? So, in other words, it doesn't really matter whether it goes straight or whether it goes around. If it dumps its zircons into the same pool as the Virgin River is doing it, you would expect to see Colorado River zircons in the Muddy Creek Formation, and you don't. The article, I think, is good at criticism of an opposing theory, and it makes some fair points. I think it is less good at self-criticism. And I raised the question, could that be because of resistance to catastrophism? Because after all, the Hopi Lake spillover is a catastrophic theory, which is not terribly popular in geology all the time. Now, my own theory is that the Native Americans had it right. At least according to Robert Wallace in 1973, The Grand Canyon. He said, the Navajo, the Hualapai, and the Havasupai still believe that the river is a runoff from a great flood that once covered the earth. I think they got it right. But that's my opinion. Now it's your turn. Yeah, go ahead. And then,
is there any evidence of a earthquake fault that is running in that same area that the Colorado River is following at the present time? If so, that could cause a crack in that rock formation that then allows the water to escape down through that crack.
there's all kinds of earthquake faults in that area, including one that I'm going to discuss with Monty Fleming after the discussion here.
Yeah, just in reply to that, there are a few areas where the river follows some of the main faults, but almost all the main faults are north-south. The river is from east to west. It is not basically fault controlled at all.
And therein lies the tale.
You can see that the river, you can see that where the river has cut across the faults, it's created side canyons that are pretty impressive in certain areas.
Yes, yes.
Just a couple comments. Or somebody else want to talk first?
Go ahead.
As you gave in the introduction, there are at least 6 major models for the formation of the Grand Canyon in the geological literature per se, and many small variations of these. They all suffer from lack of water. And I think the evidence that the canyon was cut by water is rather, you can make a fairly strong case about it. But you need to have enough water to do it. The lake spillover, as you implied to a certain extent, but I do imply to much stronger, there's not that much water in those lakes to cut the Grand Canyon. This is, I think Steve Austin and Meek here at Cal State San Bernardino and so on, did not take into account the fact you need a lot of water to cut that canyon. I've seen figures that maybe they had 3,000 cubic miles of water in those lakes. The figure you gave there suggests a little more. But the canyon itself is over 1,000 cubic miles in volume.
You're not counting the great denudation. You're just counting.
I'm not counting the great denudation above that. I'm just counting the canyon itself. How are you going to cut 1,000 cubic miles with 10,000 cubic feet of water? I mean, you keep pouring water on rocks, it doesn't erode that fast.
Well, to be fair to them, remember that when we were reviewing the Canyon Lake Dam spillover, that in 3 days, basically they were able to saturate the water that was flowing through with debris. That you can have water that's, I don't know, 20% dirt in it, and come out okay on the other end. So there may be enough water to cut a canyon. It would be pushing it, but it's possible.
In their model, it is particularly difficult because the rocks are harder than that.
That's true.
But
a bigger flow does more damage, as we can see from what happened at the Spokane floods.
But the one point that I must say I have to say is totally destructive of their model is this imaginary stream capture headward erosion of a river for 100 miles, at least, while it goes up and down and forth, at least 100 miles of headward erosion without a source of water. This is headed towards the top of the dome, and you don't have rivers up there at the top of the dome. Rivers form lower down, from degradation. How in the world could a single, I don't know what, imaginary force cut a canyon deep without a source of water to capture that suggested stream up there to the north?
Well, it's worse than that. Not only do you have this stream that's trying to make it up, but you have the Colorado River cutting down in its usual path. And eventually, it seems like the Colorado River would cut faster than the stream would.
Sure, it just doesn't make sense to have a stream without any source capturing a great big river. I mean, it just doesn't work. But I just say, that there are several bits of good evidence that the canyon was cut by. One is the Great Denudation, which it takes a lot of water to do that and leave the cliffs still there. If it was a slow process, how come the cliffs are still there? So that's one point. You got all these side canyons, hundreds of them, without a source of water. Again, the flood would do that.
Yeah.
You got streams, different stream patterns in the Grand Canyon, leaving all these isolated monadocs around there. A single river would not do that as readily as a flood from above type of thing. And you've got the canyon really washed out nicely, as you'd expect by a flood. Not the accumulation of sediments you see usually at the bottom of cliffs. There's a lot of good evidence that favors that canyon was cut by the flood.
Yeah. And the other thing that you don't see that is playas on the north where you really should see them. In areas where there's river water coming down and then slowing down and kind of fanning out at the bottom. You see a little bit of it, but not nearly as much as you'd expect. I agree.
Well, the thing seems to me like it's even worse, as Dr. here has mentioned several times in his class. The strata in these mountains, rock, makes most sense to think that they were laid down by water. And then we can't explain how it got so hard. Another stream of water came through and dug a hole through it. It makes sense. The flood makes sense because you're looking at thousands of times more weight. With water, covers the whole earth, covers all the surface. And you got all that starting to drain off, and it comes through this soft, still somewhat soft sediment. The flood makes sense. These guys are going to be confused if the world lasts for another 10,000 years. They're going to still be confused.
Well,
They're
one
gonna
of the
have
things that's
faint-sided.
interesting is that they have the Colorado rivers running through this, and it has to go somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas if you're dealing with a short-age model, the Colorado River fills up a little bit of a pond or something like that when it breaches one area and then whizzes through the rest of it later on. I think the short-age model is a lot easier to explain than a
makes
long-age
sense.
model where you have the river just keeping coming through. And
Yeah, this is
what do you do
crazy.
with all that water? And somehow it never contaminates the muddy ridge deposits.
Yeah.
Question here and then up there and
Okay, I was somebody else. Is it my turn or somebody else?
yeah, it's your turn.
Okay, I was thinking in a similar fashion. Is there any of these theories consider that this was possible without the sediments being very, very soft? In other words, is there any way, or is anybody, any expert trying to explain this without very soft sediments? Because, I mean, the
Well,
pictures...
they're trying to explain it without soft sediment. The question is, does it work?
Well, that's my point.
It can't be too soft because otherwise you can't leave cliff faces.
Even what I'm saying is, suppose there was a flood today, similar flood to Noah, with plenty of water. Would it cut through the rock so easily and so deep?
It might, and the reason why is because once water gets flowing fast enough and hard enough, it will take out anything. It'll cut right through bedrock. It is amazing how well it will do. And there's another point to be made about this, and that is how long does it take for rock to harden? Well, I don't know if we have an exact answer, but I can tell you that in human-engineered rock, it takes about 3 days.
Well, they are pouring cement right now over here, and they pour the cement. After a few days, they are working again. So, I mean, it's very fast.
Comment here, and then
Well, but cement is a special type of rock. I don't think we should attribute sandstone, for example, the rate at which sandstone can become stone at the same rate as cement.
no, but it gives you some idea,
A range, I
and
suppose.
especially sandstone that has limestone sitting on top of it, which is common.
Right. So I'm wondering if perhaps some computer modeling, I've sort of got to imagine that this has already been done, computer modeling to sort of be sort of like a supercomputer with a lot of little voxels, and you can set the hardness of the rock, and you can have different layers and things like that.
And you can run
model
water over it
uplift
and stuff.
all these sorts of things. Whether having a computer model like that to work with, you try different things and do you find something that sort of works, and perhaps it's a way to explore different theories.
It's a possibility. As a matter of fact, it's either by the University of Colorado or by Montana, where they created a landscape with mountains and plains and a little bitty sea on the bottom end of it, And one of the things that was really striking, and I wish I could find the article. I have not been able to trace it down now. I saw it once, and that was before I knew that I needed to collect these things. And one of the things they did was they raised the water level above the plains, and then they lowered it down. And what they got was a canyon that was sharp and dendritic, and it was amazing to see what it looked like. And someday, if I can find that article, I'll show you the photograph, and you'll go, whoa. That's not computer modeling, but it is modeling. And it raises an interesting question. Maybe one of the things that we should be doing is putting models with, maybe with layers of different colored and different strength
Are you saying like
deposits.
clay, like real clay models, not computer models?
Yeah, like real clay, sand,
Right.
whatever models, and then flooding them, and then just watching to see what happens when you let the waters down. Maybe what happens if you raise some things up. The fact of the matter is that catastrophic flooding models are in their infancy. Even though J. Harlan Bretz initiated the idea in 1923, very few people have followed up with it, and most of the models that have been there have been kind of, look and see, this is how it happened here, this is how it happened there, and very little of people going and saying, well, how much water do you need to get this kind of a formation? And that's why the model that I just spoke of, it was so striking when I saw it. And I wish I could find it. And if I can, I'll show it to you guys, and your jaws will drop too.
Well, we do have a more recent one from Mount St. Helens where the water broke through that earthen dam, and it created a 30-foot deep wall that was vertical, and it had the different strata layers in it, and it looked like a miniature Grand Canyon, and that was soft sediment, but it had all these different layers from all the different layers of mud that had laid down, and so that it might be worthwhile taking a look at that Mount St. Helens article, because there was a researcher that pulled together an interesting article on Mount St. Helens, that ravine that was carved.
That's another place where, basically we should be looking at seeing what happens when all this kind of stuff I don't know if you've seen photos of the Grand Teton Dam, which went down over a 2-hour period. I mean, it's just incredible to watch successive photos where, at first there's a little bitty stream coming out, and then there's a bigger stream, and then it's taking bulldozers and everything with it, and then it just cut out probably a quarter of the dam. It's just gone. And it's amazing to see what water can do if it's given the chance. Do we have a question up here or comment?
I think he's asking, when did this happen?
Yeah.
When did the Grand Teton?
This
It was 73 or 72, somewhere about then, I think.
I was thinking it was in the 80s, but I may be wrong. But it was, they built the dam, and they built it of material that they later decided was not the best, maybe. And it just, they filled it up, and then it just cleaned out, and it killed about 12 people or something like that.
June 5 of 76. I'm sorry, June 5, 76. It's almost the bicentennial. So I guess what I'm saying is that we could have natural examples like Mount St. Helens, or we could have models that we create that show sort of examples. In other words, it's evidence, but it's not exactly close it's not close at all to the structures that we have today or were in the past. If a computer model could actually show plateaus and show, take the data, a lot of different data points to construct the computer model and be able to show that a catastrophic explanation, or, catastrophic event could explain the formations that we actually see.
And then you could run your model for 1 million years and let the Colorado run through with a flood every once in a while and see if it can account for the kinds of things you see. I suspect not. The side canyons they're dry.
Yeah. So
and some of them follow faults, which is even weirder.
yeah. So I guess what I'm saying, this would be a very sophisticated and probably would take a lot of money, a lot of researchers working on it. So maybe this is not practical, but it seems to me as though if one could be able to say, hey, here is this model that shows what we have today, what we can observe today, and we can show how we can get here. And so now there's a legitimate flood theory, with pretty good evidence. And then it's basically up to others to say, no, we can achieve the same thing with a long age approach. And if they have real difficulty and the catastrophic model works well and the others are having real problems, to me that would be like a huge impact.
Well, as far as we could get that information out, I think that would be true. Now, for what it's worth, we do have somebody in the creationist community who is an expert at doing those little voxel models. His name is John Baumgartner.
NASA.
And he might even be willing to cooperate with you.
Or a geologist, which I'm not.
Well, the thing of it is that the most difficult part is going to be the actual computer modeling. And he's already done that for the entire world. So I would think that, rescaling it with a section that's so big might be...
Well, he did it for tectonics, is that right?
He did it for plate tectonics, but see, you can do the same thing for just the top layer and move things up and down, and then you could be more detailed with your model, because the problem with the entire Earth model is, of course, that at a certain point, your voxels have to be big enough so that the computer can handle all of them.
Yeah.
Whereas you could do more refined modeling with a... so we have a comment way in the back here who hasn't had a chance yet. So if we can pass the mic back to him.
Okay, we're talking about a problem with not having enough water unless it's a flood, is basically what I hear. Is that what I'm saying?
That's pretty much correct.
And we know that by what tells us we don't have enough water?
Well, the climate right now is somewhat arid. In order to get enough water to collect in a small stream, you have to, you think about it, you have a river already going through. It seems like the river would cut faster than a small stream would, which means that eventually this stream loses its battle to try to capture the river, because the river is cutting faster than the stream can cut down to meet it.
Okay, so how does that jive with not having enough water?
Well, you have water in the river, but you don't have that much water in the stream because there's not that much rain in the area.
Okay, now...
This is the Arizona desert.
Yeah, I know, but we did have an ice age. There's no
so
way that we
maybe there
get
was more rain during some time period?
Well, even when you look at the scablands, what you talked about up in Spokane, lots of that water was actually shored up by ice. And
Yeah.
you can't see where all that water was stored. And that all that water comes down from the north, which is what the Grand Canyon is, right? There's a lot of water that comes down from the north. So there is a lot of potential for water that we can't see just because the ice is gone. So there could be a lot of things that could have happened.
Well, again, the amount of water that you get in the stream has to be less than the amount of water that's flowing through the Colorado, because the Colorado has a much larger drainage basin.
Okay, but that's only if you're saying that the Colorado River stays at that one size. But you know, if you have ice ages and they're changing the water flow, you can't really go by that, because you might have times when there's lots of water coming down the Colorado, and maybe not.
Yeah, but if it's coming down the Colorado, the thing of it is, if you try to increase the water so that the stream has a better chance of cutting, which is what you're trying to do, you want the stream to get to the Colorado before the Colorado cuts down below where the stream is already.
I don't hear him saying anything about a stream. You're talking stream, he's not, right?
Well, I'm hearing two things. We're talking about stream, and then we're talking about this can only happen with a flood. And so I'm just saying, okay, yeah, it could happen with a flood, but it could also, there's also possibilities of a lot of water coming from the ice age, which could do a lot of carving also.
He's arguing that an ice age increases the rate of the stream cutting back. I don't think I should say that. I think he's just making a general statement that the amount of water needed to cut the Grand Canyon, that he's saying, he's hearing people say that there's simply not, the Colorado doesn't provide enough water to cut down that far.
Okay.
But if you were to have release of water in a catastrophic sort of way where the ice,
Right, right.
Let's see, what you have some very interesting formations, including, Butte in the middle with cut on one side and cut on the other side, and the Colorado River right now goes on the other side. It's not clear how you can carve off the side where the Colorado River doesn't go and leave the butte intact.
Well, there's also uplift that happens, which definitely happens.
Canyon. No, not in the Grand Canyon.
There's no uplift in
well,
the Grand
No,
Canyon?
there is a lot of uplift, but not local uplift.
Not local
It's
uplift.
regional.
The idea is that if there's uplift, it's going to be over a fairly large area. It's not going to uplift the butte all by itself. The butte.
I don't know
well,
about
well,
that.
here's the thing. If it did, then you could see layers on the butte that would not match the layers on either side. That is to say, if the butte is getting uplifted, then you would expect, layer A to be up, say, 500 meters above where it is over here on the canyon wall.
That doesn't happen?
No.
That's right. Well, you go and look at it, and you can see it doesn't happen.
Well, there is a big, there is an uplift over the Grand Canyon, though, isn't there?
There is, but it uplifts the whole thing. It doesn't uplift a little piece of it here and there. And that's the problem.
But I think he's moving in the right direction, suggesting the Missoula flood and so on. That's what we're talking about, the flood activity.
Yeah, and in fact,
That,
I think that the Bittahoche Lake theory, although it may not be adequate, is again moving in the right direction, and I think the old guard realizes it and doesn't like it.
I
Because once you start accepting catastrophe, then it looks like you can make a case for catastrophe taking that whole canyon out, and that's bigger than any of the lakes.
You're going to need a lot more in Lake Bittahoche for the Great Denudation.
Now, if you're doing the great denudation by water, we're talking global size flood. We are. Now the question is, how far down does that go? Could there be lakes that carve out the last little bit of it.
Yeah,
that were left.
that's very plausible. Very plausible. The last bits
And
of it.
and
yes.
I'm suggesting that when you have areas of the Colorado River that look like slot canyons, it's very possible that some of those were carved by Vernal Lake or one of the other lakes out north, combined perhaps with the Bittahochee, and that the Bittahochee in fact did carve the little Colorado River down to where it meets the Colorado River. So there's the possibility of a combination is there. But I think that a major part of it is water that overflowed the whole area. And in fact, you can show exact analogies of that to Washington State, where water that overflowed the whole area, and nobody questions that anymore. Took out fault line that's running catty corner to the river itself, and just ate the fault line out, and now you can see that in the Grand Canyon as well. And that implies that the water overflowed the whole thing. And now we're talking water. Couple comments. Go ahead.
Well, I have some problems with all of this. And that is that I've heard, at least assumed, that the Ice Age went as far as Kansas City. And I think when, where was it, up in Alaska, somebody else here maybe it would come up with it a little quicker. There's a bay up there or gorge or whatever. It was 50 miles deep when they discovered it back 200 years ago. Now 50 miles have gone. But anyhow, that's in the industrial age. But before the industrial age, if they're right about Kansas City, you got about 4,000 miles of possibly glaciarization has disappeared. That would contain a lot of water, but how far have our seas gone? I've heard everything from they've been 400 feet lower to several hundred feet higher than they are even presently. Now we're losing water, and it says it's going to come up 3 or 4 feet, and everybody's scared. I don't think there would be enough. Now, it might have been when the glaciers were really melting off at some point. It might have been enough to come through here to add more cutting power to the river. But we still got those layers of silt has been laid down and made all these, I had it a few minutes ago, that these cliffs are made out of. We can see one on top of the other. That's going to take more like floodwater, not just a rather rapid glaciers. In my point, would not create strata. And we got that problem to deal with. And that means there's a lot more water than we could ever calculate coming through this way or even with glaciers. Anyhow, that's just a comment, and there's a couple of people around here.
Yeah. Were you talking about the Great Gorge of Ruth Glacier? In Alaska, were you talking about the Great Gorge of Ruth Glacier?
No, it's something bay up there.
Prudhoe Bay?
Yeah, I think so.
Two quick questions. Number one, the Indian tribes, they go along with the creationists, the flood, Great Flood. Now, has anyone figured out how many hundreds of years these folk have been there, the Indian tribes, because they have a common story to tell that these things happened because of the flood?
Well, the traditional belief is that you can go back about 11,000 years for the Native Americans. So it's is pretty ancient tradition. I mean, does it go all the way back? Well, without written records, it's hard to say for sure. But certainly, it's been kept intact for a much longer period of time than the white man has been there.
And all these tribes have the common story that there was a flood that
They
caused
all
it.
have a common story, and therein lies the tale. That it turns out that there's a common story all over the world about that kind of thing.
That is true. Yes.
And floodwaters figure prominently in that common story.
When you fly over canyons, you notice that so many of these have hairpin turns, and so if the rocks were not formed, they were soft, what would make the water that's rushing down like crazy, like what happened in Mount St. Helena, right? And because it went fairly straight down, but these have hairline turn. Could it be that there was also a great earthquake at the time and the tectonic plates did move some, not a continental shift, but some, and so it cracked, and so it just formed this way in the water? Just a thought.
That's a possibility. The other thing that can happen is that when you run water down at force, or slowly even, it tends to meander. And some of this may be just natural meanderings. On the other hand, maybe there were areas of rock that were harder than others, that got more cement, and so it was easier to take out the rock with poorer cement. You can see this phenomenon in the Mormon rocks up north of us, where there are some places where you can actually just dig into the rock with your hand. And there are some places where the rock is really hard. If you were to hit that, you could damage yourself pretty badly. Some of it will stand up straight, and then some of it, like I say, will just crumble. And some of it, you can actually, dig into the sand and see that it changes gradually into rock that gets harder and harder as for you dig further. The idea that all of a formation has to be glued at exactly the same amount with exactly the same strength is really one that probably should be left behind. And that same kind of thing apparently can produce things like arches, where you've got some areas that are pretty hard and then other areas that are softer that can be dug out from underneath them, and then you have left arch of hard rock with the weathering that's taking place underneath it. And there are some amazing arches in Arches National Monument. It's just, it's all over there. I suspect most of that is because of variations in the strength of the cement.
Yeah, I was thinking we have the St. Helen model. Could someone use that catastrophic event to calculate the amount of water necessary to cut the Grand Canyon with the flood model?
You could do some calculations. Whether they would relate to reality is a little bit more difficult to test, but I think that they might give you at least a ballpark idea. And it's just a matter of people who have the necessary training in sedimentology and the necessary training in mathematics to go about doing